a number of things pertaining to city business. So I want to get right to it. We have quite a few items. We'll start with item 1, of course, approval of city council minutes dated 11/18/21. Is there a motion to second?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions or corrections from council members? If I don't ask one of these times, somebody's going to have a question. So hearing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy, Mr. Allison.
Yes. Motion passes 6-0. Ms. Mealy is going to be attempting to
Miss
show up on
Mealy's
that
here,
screen.
sorry.
Meeting through
Randy,
the Zoom, but
Randy, can you hear me?
she'll be around soon. Item 2, limited courtesy of the floor. We've had no requests tonight. So we'll move to, I want to move item 10 up to the top. And would you read that in short form, please, Mrs. Frank?
Resolution adopting the Williamsport Heart and Soul Peer Report and Action Plan.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion and a second from council?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Welcome tonight.
Good evening, President Allison, members of council. We are presenting the final report on the Community Heart and Soul Project. The project began in 2016 and has been an ongoing initiative involving the Susquehanna Greenway Partnership, the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, the Orton Family Foundation, the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and the city of Williamsport. This process has been impacted by COVID-19 and slowed down. So we're bringing it to you tonight so that we can close out the grant before the end of the year. Alice Trowbridge is in attendance, who spearheaded this project, and she'll give you a quick overview of the project and also answer any and all of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Skip. Good evening tonight, Alice.
Good evening. Thank you.
Good to have you here.
Yeah, as you said, this was a process of community engagement that was resident driven. I was the peer consultant. I was the project coordinator, but there were thousands of volunteer hours that went into the outreach and gathering of the data that is before you in the report. The report, to be very brief about this, was we summarized the process we went through and the ideas for action that came out of the public input. There is a lot more data than even what is in your report, has been shared with Chelsea. It will reside. There's going to be additional files on the community and economic, or the Community and Economic Development Department's website for you to access. I will be available for questions at this point, but also I know you have a very busy agenda. If you would like me to come back at a point in the future and go into something in more depth, I'd be happy to do so. But again, Chelsea was part of the team, one of the volunteers that helped put things together and worked through gathering the data. So you have somebody in-house who's very knowledgeable. And I know many of you council members and the mayor participated in the activities we had to gather the information here. So to be brief with it, I'm going to just step back and answer any questions that anyone may have.
This was reviewed in finance, and Mrs. Katz, would you care to?
Hey, Randy, can you guys hear me?
Hi, Alice. You know, I've been very familiar with Heart and Soul since the very conception of it. It's an incredible program. And one of the things you and I have discussed, that this is something that even should be incorporated into the comprehensive plan, because there is so much vital information in this document at this point. I think to clarify, the reason why this has been pushed for this meeting is because of closing out and it has to be done by December. So the grant was invaluable. I know there have been numerous places that you met with a diversity. Okay. Is that me? Are we okay now? No?
Yeah.
It's okay now? Okay. You are going to go on further with this process because there still is a lot more that can be accomplished with this. Anybody who has not read this or gone through it, it's something that I think you would enjoy seeing and hearing what people throughout our city have verbalized. The history of our city is in this. The wants, needs, and desires of our citizens are in this. And I just think it's an incredible document. Alice, you did a tremendous job. Like, you've been working on this for how many years at this point? And it's because of you that it didn't just stop. It just continued going. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to see how the process is going to continue.
Yeah,
And this was passed with a positive recommendation by the Finance Committee.
Any other comments from council? We did have an opportunity to participate in that, members of council and the administration, and this is the kind of thing that city government cannot really produce or be out front on, but we need to be the support behind it, because when we deal with budgets and dollars and police vehicles and equipment of all kinds, that's the hardcore material stuff that we need to make the city infrastructure run and take public safety in all those areas. But the quality of life is equally as important to the citizens of Williamsport, but it doesn't get the flash and the bang that the other areas normally do for, reasonable, for good reason is what I want to say. But other than that, now's the time that we need to pick up the mantle and run with it and help our community development department, as well as every other entity that's mentioned, and the ideas that the citizens came up with, and regular people from a diverse group of people, which is good. The whole community was represented in this entire process. So it wasn't a top-down thing. It's a bottoms-up grassroots thing. And those are the kinds of things that sometimes are the most successful, because there's so many people that buy in or are involved. So we definitely want to have you back next year, when the dust settles and 2021 is in the books. Early next year would be great to really spend some time to educate ourselves and remind ourselves, and let newer council members that didn't have the interaction that some of us did understand a lot of the nuances and the things behind it. So Mrs. Katz, yes.
I think, Alice, remind us of some of the people who participated who are no longer with us. I think that's very important.
Yes, we had a raft of volunteers, but Richard James was someone who was near and dear to this project and contributed a lot. Meg Finn and Father Mano. They were three people who very much supported this project and put a lot of hours in. And in our acknowledgement letter in the front of the document, we asked to dedicate this in their memory for all that they did.
Mhm.
Thank you. for bringing
Very
that up.
appropriate, yes. Three valuable people in our community that did a lot and were role models in a lot of these areas. I met Richard before he was famous. Years back. And I forget how we ran into each other, but we just began to talk about life and people and in Williamsport and everything. And, over the years, got to know him better. And yeah, he was a unique but thoughtful man. And we're poor for him not being here, but richer for the things that he did put in motion and inspired the rest of us to follow up on. So as well as Meg and Father Mano, of course, was an institution in this community. Having grown up here, born and raised here. In fact, Father Mano came from the church that I went to as a child, and his family was there. And I remember distinctly when he was ordained into the priesthood, and there was just something different about him as far as his personality and magnetism, and his love for people was just overflowed from even that brief interlude. So, and I knew Meg too, because she was the same age as our second oldest daughter, and went to school together. So they were very talented, caring people, all of them. So, but in any case,
Yeah, they all loved the city and they wanted to
did.
make it a better place. And we appreciated all the efforts they put in. And just as a quick note for those who are new to council, there's no project idea when you start with Heart and Soul. You really just go out and you ask open-ended questions like, what do you love about living in the city? What do you love most about life here or working here? And people start telling you and expressing that. And so what we got was qualitative data, which is a whole different process of extracting, but it gives you things, like you said, that you don't get so much about infrastructure. It's more about quality of life. So at some point I would be happy to come back, and I'm sure
Great.
Chelsea would be happy as well to work with you to help bring everybody up to speed.
wonderful.
Great.
Well, if there aren't any other comments, we'll have the vote, please, Mrs. Frank.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
try Ms. Mealy. Mr. Allison.
Yes, motion passes 6-0. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Thank you, Alice, Skip, Chelsea. We'll be in touch. Let's go back up to item 3. Would you read that in short form, please, Mrs. Frank?
Ordinance amending Part 1 of the codified ordinances of the city of Williamsport, and this would be the final reading, has to be removed from the table.
Mhm. Is there a motion and a second?
So move. Second.
So we need to remove this from the table. Well, we'll make let's start with that. Motion to remove from the table.
I'll make a motion to remove.
Okay,
Second.
seconded. Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes, motion passes 6-0. Mr. Yoder.
Thanks, President Allison. So this is the final reading of an ordinance creating a transit oversight committee. We've had some good discussion during the first reading of this and then the second reading of this. The one thing that I would add, in the last meeting, there was the idea and discussion of adding a member to the committee, a member of the Watts committee. I quickly spoke with a couple of the commissioners between last meeting and now, and they love the idea and would fully support having a member of the Watts committee serve in this capacity. So I can certainly motion to amend if everybody else is ready, but I can certainly leave it open for more deliberation and discussion before doing that. So I'll yield to other members.
Any thoughts from other members?
It's a good idea.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Mr. Oh, okay. I thought you were shaking your head. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
All right, I'll make a motion to amend the ordinance to add a member of the committee would be bullet point number 9, a member of the Watts committee designated by that committee.
I will second that motion.
Okay, moved and seconded to amend the contract or amend the ordinance to include a member from the Watts committee. Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes, motion passes 6-0. Motion, the ordinance is amended. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. And now we need a motion to pass the amended ordinance.
I make a motion.
For the final reading. Yeah. Okay. Do we, Norm?
Not really.
Okay.
I'll take it back.
Okay, moved and seconded. Mrs. Frank on the motion to approve in final reading.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes, motion passes 6-0. You excuse me for a minute. Okay, Liz said she can hear us, but we can't hear her for some reason. So she's going to try to get here in person as soon as she can. So we'll give her some time to do that. Let's move to item 4. Would you read that in short form, please, Mrs. Frank?
Ordinance authorizing the designation of the redevelopment authority of the city of Williamsport as the land bank authority in first reading.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion and second?
So moved. Second.
Welcome, Mayor Slaughter.
Good evening, President Allison, members of council. Yes, before you is an ordinance authorizing the designation of the redevelopment authority of the city of Williamsport as the land bank authority. Obviously, we've been talking about this for a while. And so this would delegate the redevelopment authority as the land bank authority. That was authorized by the state legislature. When this was created as a possibility, just give our RDA the powers of the land bank. And this was reviewed by Solicitor White, and after conversations with him, he said it's probably the easiest route since we already have an RDA. We don't have to create another. We're creating a separate authority, but to give them the powers, so we don't need another 5 to 7 members. We could just delegate them as a land bank, and they would work in concert with each other anyway. So the RDA land bank, this would obviously be to address vacant, abandoned, commercial, residential, industrial properties. It's obviously, we've talked about this a lot during our ARPA discussions. Councilman Yoder brought up, land bank redevelopment, et cetera. And so this is the first ordinance, for your review. It
Okay,
was not reviewed in committee.
pardon me.
It was not reviewed in committee.
Right, yes. It was a busy afternoon. Questions from council? Mr. Yoder?
Yeah, a couple. And this was not reviewed, as Mayor Slaughter said, in committee. We ran out of time. So unfortunately, so sorry about that, Mayor Slaughter.
That's okay.
So just for the public's knowledge, because I'm pretty sure 9 people out of 10 don't have any idea what a land bank authority is, and probably the other maybe 1 might have even heard about it. But talk about the differences, I suppose, between the capabilities of what the land bank gives us versus the redevelopment authority? Because there is a difference, and it would not be probably bad for all of us to understand those differences.
Sure. So the main difference with the land bank authority, it gives us what is called a trump bid. So if a property is underwater in taxes, and we exercise this trump bid, it allows, I say us, it would be the land bank authority, aka redevelopment authority, if they have the powers, to then acquire that property. No one else can bid on it. It comes to us. It will come to the land bank authority, and then we can determine the best use for that, to get it to a developer, develop it ourselves, et cetera. Raise it as an option. But really, it just gives us, so really the dog of dog properties, and we all know where they are. And if they're under, instead of having that perpetual cycle of slumlords or just getting it to people that aren't going to do anything with it, we can now exercise this trump bid, and then that takes care of all other bidding. Nobody else can bid on it, and we can acquire it. Obviously, you wouldn't do this with every single property. You'd need the RDA land bank, would have to have some thought process behind this. So that's a little bit different than the RDA and some of the powers that they have. So that's why, it would all work in concert. You just don't have the RDA, you have the land bank. It's essentially another tool in our tool belt as we're addressing blight remediation. Obviously, right now, we have the Blighted Property Review Board, we have the RDA, land bank would just be another set of tools that we could exercise to work hand in hand. So we designate a property blight. The RDA has some things they can do with it to acquire. And now if a property is under in taxes, we have a land bank created, we can acquire that as well. So it really, especially if, the discussion to dedicate some dollars towards the RDA land bank blight remediation, this really gives us some teeth now to start to go after some of these properties that we all know have been issues historically that we just haven't had the dollars to go after. So, I'm very excited about the land bank. I spoke, at length with Mayor Lombardo in Pittston, and I would, reference Pittston tonight for any of you to check it out. They've used their land bank extremely well to do some development in Pittston with some properties. Now theirs is slightly different because theirs is a multi-municipality. They're not big enough in and of themselves to have a land bank all by themselves. So it's a multiple one, municipality one, but nonetheless, Mayor Lombardo spearheaded that, and they've done a great job with redeveloping. And so I think, with our targeted, properties and having a plan that we would have with the RDA land bank, Blighted Property Review Board, we expanded that by 2 members. We really have a coordinated effort. We could make a difference, which was discussed during the ARPA meeting with addressing some of these properties, particularly ones that have just been, historically, pretty bad properties, dogwood fleas properties, so to speak.
I appreciate that. Maybe another mechanism question. As we look at allocating capital to each of these, do we need to allocate separate like tranches or amounts? Do we understand, I guess, maybe how the mechanisms of that
between the
work,
RDA
or-
and land bank? If we grant the RDA the land bank authority, do we have to grant? That's probably a question for Norm. If the RDA has the land bank powers, do we have to, if we dedicate, say, $2 million, $1 million to the land bank, $1 million to the RDA, or can we just say this is $2 million for the RDA/land bank?
The easiest way would be, since redevelopment authority would be in charge, so to speak, that you dedicate the money to them, but you restrict the use of the money.
Right.
So that way, if you give each entity or allocate $1 million to each entity, that way, they're restricted on how they're going to use the money.
Right. And we've also spoken with the RDA about a management agreement with the city so that we're just not giving them, essentially unfettered use of dollars. So we still have some say in the direction of these, how these dollars are spent. So that would be, talking to Austin White, he said, this is step 1, and then bringing some type of MOU or agreement before council is the next step after that.
Gotcha.
Once they have that.
Some food for thought, and I don't know if Councilman Banks was planning to bring this up or not. If he was, I'll let him expand on this potentially. But I know earlier in the year, we were working through some various ideas about economic development of the city and trying to position the city so that it was more of a decade process and viewpoint versus a election cycle viewpoint. And part of those talks were about the potential for an economic development authority. Something to consider as the city looks at some kind of a management agreement, perhaps that would make more sense. Having a mechanism like that outside of city government where that is in more control of painting the economic vitality vision of the city, and then also has a direct conduit to this, so that there is direct cohesion in between them. And we can kind of maximize synergies there. So just a thought. That was going to be one of my other questions, was what could that relationship look like if that would transpire? But it seems like that might be feasible. So just some
Sure.
food for thought
Sure. And
as we go into next year.
and the relationship with our community development office as well. What does that look like, around? So yes, we're exploring all that. So, yeah.
The other question I have, it's more of the intricacies of the ordinance itself. So this looks to be a direct copy from DCED's website,
Exactly.
which is fine and dandy. I do know that they note to just make sure that change it as is needed for the city. So since Solicitor White reviewed this, I'm assuming it's okay.
Yes.
There's nothing that was caught that we might need to amend or add to
Nope. So
position ourselves for success. Given
no,
the
but
uniqueness
according to
of Williamsport.
Austin, this is the state legislature. This is
Mhm.
how they passed it. And he said there's absolutely no need. He reviewed it. He already made the changes, I guess, that need to be made, which were essentially nothing
Okay.
other than adding us in. But he said, this is all we need to do. And
Okay.
we're squared away. Yep,
All right. Thank you very much.
sure.
Mr. Mackey.
Good evening, Mayor.
Councilman?
I just had one question here. Section 8, letter C says that the authority as a land bank acquires residential property occupied by owner occupants. It shall be the authority's policy to show a preference for keeping them in their homes. I'm just curious, under what circumstance would you see the city purchasing it? I guess it would be a home with people living in it. And how exactly do we then go about keeping them in their home? Because I'm assuming we're not going to be in the
No, we're not
business of
gonna-
being landlords.
Right. No, we're not going to. So from my understanding with this one, we wouldn't look to displace anyone. It could be one of those times where a house is, or a home, residential home is underwater and taxes with the landlord. We could acquire it, fix it up, and then have it owner occupied again, either with those same folks or get it back in the hands of a viable landlord that would keep these folks in their homes. That's probably an extreme example as far as, where we would acquire property that's already occupied. That's probably slim to none chance of happening. Because if it is occupied in a rental, our codes department would be on that. However, if it is that bad where we'd be looking to acquire it, there's probably other things that would happen long before the land bank would acquire that. So, but that is in there because it is an option that I've never seen played out before when I've spoken to Mayor Lombardo, but we did talk about the owner occupancy. More likely what is to happen and what they've done in Pittston, from my understanding, is to acquire vacant, and then as part of the sell to the next one, it's got to be owner occupied. They've done that sometime to make it a single family residence, things of that nature. But I'm not aware of any cases where, the land bank has acquired and just displaced people. That would never be the goal, in my eyes anyway.
Any other questions? Or comment?
I'm getting an eyebrow from Adam, so I think I should chime in here. This is the last time I'm going to say this, I promise. But as we move forward with the land bank and giving all this money to the redevelopment authority, I just want to remind us that we need to make sure that we have some sort of a cohesive strategy, so that we're not just kind of piecemeal acquiring properties, that it follows some sort of initiative. And I promise that's the one more meeting we're going to talk about this, but I'm not going to mention it again. So you've heard, I've beaten that thing. So, but thank you for bringing it to us. This is very exciting.
Yeah, and thank you for all your work you've done, obviously, and along these lines with the Land Bank Authority and economic development. So, he's played a very important role in getting us to this point as well. So thank you for your work.
Well, it sounds very good. Thank you, everybody that worked on it. I think it's gonna, I agree, it's gonna be an important structure in our ability to develop and to increase the viability of our tax base and all those things that we need.
And I guess I could mention one other piece of the land bank. I could have mentioned it earlier with Councilman Yoder's question, is there's agreements between the school district, the city, and the county, the tax collecting bodies, where for the first 5 years, you could capture 50% of the city. We could capture 50% or 100%. And I should mention Skip Memmy, our Director of Economic Development, was part of the first land bank ever created in the Commonwealth after this law passed. So he has extreme knowledge around this as well. But working with the school district, the city, and the county, we could capture the city for the first 5 years up to 100% of those of the tax collection. And the reason that makes sense because there was no taxes being collected. You know, if it's underwater, it's nothing. So the school district's not getting anything. We're not getting anything. The county's not getting anything. So if we take the lead in redeveloping this, they, almost 99% of the time as I'm researching this, the school district and the county agree because they go from collecting nothing after 5 years, they're going to be collecting a bunch. So they say, okay, yeah, you guys are taking the lead, go ahead and capture. But we would have to go and make the presentation to the school board, obviously, and to the commissioners. But that's another advantage for the land bank for us to have it. It does get, obviously, as you said, President Allison, properties back on the tax roll.
Right. I think it's important for the public to know that this is going to be used judiciously, not.
No, right.
There was a time when the redevelopment authority in the city did some things that turned out to be not as productive as everybody had hoped they were going to be. Would that be correct, the way that I put that, Norm? I'm not putting you on the spot, but yeah.
At one time, the redevelopment authority, it was independent.
Right, okay.
Funding source.
Yeah.
Directly from the government. Other than when they needed city council approval, they were free to do pretty much what they
Yeah.
wanted.
And that was in a different time, back in the 60s. 50s, 60s.
And eventually, the city, the funding had come through the city, that gave the city the control over the authority.
So I think it's important that the public knows that this is different than that, and that kind of thing isn't going to happen.
Yeah,
So-
the real goal obviously would be to motivate current homeowners
Well, yeah.
to renovate their property,
Right.
keep their properties, up to code. If not, we have more tools in our toolbox. But no, we're not just going to be willy-nilly acquiring properties.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All we got was a blank stare from you, so.
She was cute.
Yeah. Well, welcome tonight, Councilwoman Neely.
She might have been better looking, but she couldn't really talk.
We're just finishing up with item 4, the redevelopment authority.
I heard.
Yeah, okay, good.
It sounded to me like the point that you were making right as I was walking in, Randy, related to, excuse me, because I walked up those stairs. Related to the idea that these are all tools that can be used to the advantage of the community or to the disadvantage of the community, depending on how they are used. And I think one of the things that we would have discussed had we had more time to discuss the heart and soul materials that you reviewed a little earlier was the idea that that was a community-led project that delivered ideas that were, frankly, I think surprising to those of us who are elected officials. Good ideas, concrete ideas, ideas that don't necessarily cost $3 million to implement, And so when we talk about doing something like a land bank, which has the potential for to provide an incredible boost of economic development for the city. Implementing it well, looking at how to implement it and where it is most advantageous in the city is exceptionally important. And so that we don't make the mistakes that we made in the 60s. And so I think that I'll just jump on that bandwagon that Dave and Adam were both on a couple of minutes ago. The implementation is not only important, looking at how to implement it properly is probably the most important element. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Mealy. Other comments or questions? Okay, on the motion then, please, Mrs. Frank.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Vance,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes. Motion passes 7-0 on first reading. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Okay, let's move to item 5. In short form, please, Mrs. Frank.
Ordinance amending various operating budgets. City of Williamsport.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion? Moved and seconded. Mayor Slaughter, anything you have to add to our previous discussions on the budget? Any other comments from council this evening? I do want to make it clear to the public, traditionally, there aren't a lot of changes right away. We've had the budget for about a week. So we have another meeting next Thursday. Normally that's where any changes, the majority are. And then we're going to have another meeting Thursday after that to take care of wrap up business. So there's opportunities to go up and down, or there's not going to be any big swings, I don't think, but I think everybody's digging into it. So if there aren't any questions or for Mr. Yoder.
Yeah, just some thoughts. I'll try to keep this soapbox short and sweet if I can. I know we have a lot on the agenda tonight. With this item in particular, I'm sitting here pretty conflicted. I was pretty conflicted last year. Last year was a rough year, between what was proposed, what we went through to reduce the millage rate, given the number of circumstances we were faced. It was very tough to do that. And we probably shouldn't have had to do that within a few weeks timeframe. Nonetheless, we did it. And there was a number of things, that we brought up and had asked about. And I think at least I was hoping that we would see. And I don't think we see them. Nonetheless, last year, we need a budget. I perfectly understand that. And I think to buy ourselves some more time, being conflicted, I voted for it. And unfortunately, we weren't able to get some answers. I feel conflicted again the same time. I'm not sure if I can do it again either. And there's a couple of overarching reasons why. Centered on process and strategy. And from a process perspective, we hit a lot of them yesterday specifically. We're looking at a $2 million deficit, roughly 1.8, I think is the precise exact number. And we have in front of us a bare bones budget. And we unfortunately don't have a lot of solutions to mitigate that. For the last number of years, even before I was on council, I think we all, last year we expressed this, and I think previous members of council expressed this, and I think the mayor even expressed this while on council, of doing this early. That unfortunately didn't happen again this year. And frankly, we got, I think, this later than last year. We've had this budget for a total of 8 days to review it, to go through it, and to understand it, and to frankly come up with solutions to a $1.8 million deficit. And it's just unfortunate and not efficient at all. Councilwoman Mealy pointed an excellent point out. We're missing narratives this year. There's a lot of questions that we had that we could have had answered in that we unfortunately weren't able to get. We had some additional changes brought to us yesterday. Changes that are very much, worth debate, focusing on the public safety of our city, but changes nonetheless that were brought to our attention the day that we were asking questions and deliberating about them. And you go into strategy, and we talked a lot about this last year, and there were specific points, at least that I individually asked for. I don't feel we have the progress needed in many of those areas. We just talked about this with the land bank. We need a cohesive economic development strategy for the city, and we don't have that sitting here today. After some monumental effort, I think, to try to get that off the ground. We don't have any concrete plans to address the deficit sitting here today, which is monumental, given that, again, this is a bare bones budget. We have no fiscal strategies outlined to tackle our debt obligation, which has increased, as we found out on Monday, due to a couple of different reasons. There were a number of items that we brought up. There were a number of items that I had sent to you, Mayor Slaughter. We've got little to no progress on all of those. It's unfortunate, and it's making me very conflicted. The work we have before us tonight is arguably the most important job that all 7 of us have. And frankly, that mayor has, that the controller has, that the treasurer has. It's extremely difficult, and I'd argue pretty impossible to do that within roughly 15 days whenever you talk about receiving the budget, going through the budget, and having 2 readings back-to-back weeks. It's extremely difficult, makes me very, very conflicted, as I had mentioned. We need to do this sooner. I said it last year, we'll say it again. We need to do this sooner. This process needs to be much more collaborative. It's a big issue. It's a big issue that all of us can help address. I think we all want to help address it, but we have not had that opportunity. Like I said before, I was conflicted last year in passing last year's budget. I did it, hoping that we would not repeat these mistakes. Unfortunately, we have not done that, and I can't support this budget tonight. Now, I respect that that might be a minority opinion, and frankly, it could be an irresponsible one. I respect that. If we don't have a budget, we can't spend money next year. I 100% get that. I suspect other members of council would disagree with that, and I respect that opinion very much. If there are ideas, changes, deliberations to be had, I'm happy to take part in them and offer my support in them. I'll even vote if I agree with them for the betterment of and in the spirit of trying to fix some of these things, but I don't think I can support the budget given this. We've seen it for 12 years leading up to the new administration. It's the same structure that we've seen before. It's not sustainable, and we need to learn from those lessons. So I respectfully just wanted to lay that out there for the betterment of council, for the group. I'll yield the floor, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, Councilman Yoder. And as my years on council, we welcome everybody being able to speak freely and respect each other on whatever stance you're taking. And we've always been able to do that at the table and then walk away, still enjoying each other's company. And so that's one of the most important things. I see somebody grabbing from the mic. Do you have the mic?
I got the mic.
Okay.
I mean, I had to wrestle Dave, but you guys missed it because you were looking over that one. Anyway, I actually respect that opinion, Adam, and I think that a protest vote is valid in this case, as it probably has been for the last however many budgets I've seen. Because you're right, we have, what I have always felt terribly about in my time on council is watching administrations and councils kind of kick the can a little further down the road in the larger sense of consistent deficit spending, in the smaller sense of if we are looking at deficit spending in a given year, not doing anything about it until the situation gets so bad that we have to raise taxes by a mill, and really, deal a blow to the taxpaying community in the city, and not try to adjust things fairly and evenly as we see problems arise, while, to your point, also trying to adjust on the back end, both how to build a better tax base in the city that allows us to better support the services that we want to provide, and also how to keep the city's budget as neat and trim as possible, to make certain that we're not costing those taxpayers more than we absolutely need to. All of those are exceptionally valid points. Also, to your point, the exceptionally short window that we've had to review the budget this year means that I think most of us haven't really had time to gather and have conversations about what we feel that we could change, what we feel that we could work with in this budget, which is a huge issue. Frankly, it's a tough time of year, and it's getting tougher as we get closer to Christmas. And so to be compressed even closer to Christmas in our time to review the budget made it exceptionally difficult. That said, I will be supporting the budget tonight with an eye toward looking to make amendments for things that I feel strongly about but next week. But I need that week to conference with as many people on council as possible to try and figure out what our best strategies are for improving this budget. With my apologies, Mr. Yoder, I don't think we can fix it by next week.
I don't either, not to cut you off, but I don't think we can either. I 100% agree.
Right.
Okay, I thought you guys were going to fix it by next week.
Randy, I was drinking when I told you that. Anyway, I think that there are things that we can do to at least make it more fair to the city's employees and more fair to the city's taxpayers in the next week. And they're not huge differences, but I too am dismayed. I would remind everyone that the ARPA funding that went into this year's budget, that $960 million, was intended as a makeup for lost revenue in the city's coffers. And so while the city is certainly running at least a $900,000 deficit at this point, we are not necessarily running the full 1.86, depending on how you look at the lost revenue calculation. We can continue to take that calculation for a handful of years. Part of the idea of taking that calculation is to lessen the impact of the pandemic on our citizens in terms of tax increases. And I think that we need to do that, and that we need to take advantage of that as much as possible. I also think we need to be mindful that when that lost revenue calculation runs out in a couple of years, the last thing we want to do, once again, is have to increase taxes by a vast quantity of money to make up for the lost revenue calculation that is no longer in place. So all of which is building up to me potentially making the case for the fact that we should look at raising taxes by a small amount of money this year, by a very small amount of millage, to make up for some of that $900,000 shortfall in this year's budget. And that's a conversation that I want to have with individual members of council and with the administration over the next week. But it is something that I think might be the most responsible decision that we could make to avoid a shock down the road. And that does not relieve us of the obligation to think fast and to think on our feet in terms of economic development, now that we're fortunate enough to have a pool of money that we may be able to use to further that goal. But I think that it would still simply put us in a better financial position to continue working toward a strong economic development model in the city as we move to the end of the ARPA funding. And man, I really ran on for somebody with not all that much to say. The upshot is I'll be supporting the budget, but I recognize that the vast majority of your points, Mr. Yoder, are completely accurate. And thanks for making them. Okay.
And if I may, Randy, Liz, I appreciate that and fully understand. And all the other 6 fellow members of council, I want you all to know over the next week, if there are things that I can help with, I'm happy to be a part of that process. Like I said, I'm happy to offer suggestions in second reading. I'm happy to support others' suggestions that make sense that I can support. I'm happy to be a part of that, be a part of the solution of that. To explain the deficit a little bit one more time.
Yeah.
If you take away the starting balance of the general fund, which is around $1.3 million, and then you take away the ARPA funding, okay? We have our revenue minus expenses equates to roughly $1.8 million. With true sound financial planning, that's how we should be budgeting. We should be putting the money that we have left over every year away in the event of an emergency, like COVID-19 is a prime example that we all just lived through, in a situation where we have a financial crisis or an economic crisis. We can dip into that and provide relief to our citizens. If next year in that scenario, you know, we would be looking at, if we would be right online in budget as is proposed today, we would have $500,000 of a starting balance. And if we would do the same thing, we would need at least, I'd say probably at least $1 million next year, if not more, just to balance the budget. And that's without ARPA money. Now, obviously ARPA money would change that, but that's not going to be here forever. You know, that a $250,000 increase, I can understand the argument of that potentially being a fiscally responsible solution. I understand that, but all it does is it prevents a quarter next year. We're still going to have or set ourselves up for, whether it's next year, the year after, another massive tax increase. We need to do both. We need to grow our revenue organically, Councilwoman Miller, to your point, but we need to better manage our spending. We got to get creative because, as we've all said, this is bare bones. There's really not much in here to cut or to change. We have to really think outside the box. That takes longer than 14 days, unfortunately. So, Liz, I appreciate your sentiments very much. Thank you so much. And I'll yield the floor.
Yeah, well said by both. And I think everybody probably has an equally good comment to make. And it's not to say that one thought is better than another. They can both be right at the same time. And it's a truth that's in the budget because there's so many different ways to approach it and remedy it. And to speak to that, when I was going through the budget and in past budgets, I looked at the one sheet that had the expenses, the taxes, the revenue that came in from 2017 to 2022. And I think this speaks to what we're talking about now, but also what we were talking about earlier about spurring development, because there's 2 ways to get to where you want to go: reduce expenses and increase income. And we know that we're to the point in the city that if we're going to reduce expenses, anything that's meaningful, it means cutting personnel, because that's where 75–80% of the money is. And we're getting down to where that's not, there's no money, there's no way to do that anymore without gutting everything. So let me just give you real estate tax, business privilege tax, and wage tax. And I think this kind of, in a nutshell, explains where we're at and how we've addressed it. 2017, we brought in $2,134,000 from wage tax. 2022, we're projecting $2,190,000, $56,000 improvement over 5 years is not going to make it. We're not going to balance the budget on the wage tax, but more jobs, more wages are going to create some more money. Business privilege tax, 2,103,000 in 2017. We're projecting 2,100,000 for 2022. So that's flat. That is the kind of area that economic development is going to bring in more money. And then real estate tax, 13 million in 2017, 14 million in 2022. That's how we're getting by. $1 million, pardon me? The millage. I can find that.
He's making a great point.
Nobody said there'd be math. Oh, wait, I'm doing math. I'm sorry. No.
I can.
Yeah, am I in the right book? Okay, we're 15, what? 15.7. Okay, 2022, in any case, I believe it's back here. 'Cause everybody wants to know now. Pardon me?
14.72.
For 2022. Okay.
That was 2017.
2017, what are, in this year, we're projecting 16.22. So we've had to increase revenue somehow, and we've done it on real estate tax. There's some components in there that economic development is going to answer, and hopefully we can cover those kinds of things you're talking about, Councilman Yoder, at least remedy some of it, as well as run as tight a ship as we can in other ways.
And if I can add on to the tax comparison, everybody asks, well, why don't you raise other taxes rather than the real estate taxes? Homeowners in the city always ask that question. The reason is we can't. The state of Pennsylvania determines not only what we can tax, but they put caps on what we can tax. And we're at our limits with every other tax that we levy, to my knowledge. The only one that we have flexibility on is the property tax millage rate. That's why it goes up and up and up, because we for years have not had that economic development strategy that is so desperately needed, and we still don't. It's our only way, unfortunately, to raise revenue. That's why that millage rate creeps up and creeps up.
Mhm.
There's two ways to fix that. There's reform in Harrisburg, which we all know is slow and unlikely to happen, or it's organic growth through economic development. And the latter is probably the faster and easier solution.
Other questions or comments? Okay, so we have had a motion and a second. Yeah, sure, Mr. Pelisi.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Yoder, Councilwoman Mealy, thank you very much for your comments and your input. It's greatly appreciated. Speaking to Councilman Yoder, some of the concerns that you brought up, why you are conflicted. What I was hoping to hear, I really don't have much of a comment. What I wanted to do was ask Mayor Slaughter, give him an opportunity to at least maybe help us understand or explain what happened this year as far as the amount of time that we received the budget in. And maybe it was communication, I don't know. but I at least wanted to ask you that question, Mayor Slaughter. If you could, help us understand a little bit from where you're coming from. What happened? What are we hoping to do to move forward? We all have to work together to succeed.
Yep.
No doubt about it. And the sooner we have the information in front of us, the sooner we can all collaborate, like to Councilman Yoder's point and Councilwoman Neely's point, to get together and go over things, review things. So I at least wanted to ask you and give you the opportunity to at least hear your input.
Sure. There's a number of variables, actually, some that I can go into, some that I can't tonight. I think we all know the situation that we're in currently. There was a point during the budget where I actually wasn't going to carry any money over because we're not sure that the revenues and expenditures that are represented are accurate. So from prior years. So there was a point where I wasn't going to carry over any money, actually. We had long discussions with Joe Pavlak, myself, the administration for a number of hours, actually, on what to do with that. Given the fact that we don't have audits, we had an audit that showed $11 million of commingled money. I asked Joe, actually, if we knew on the city side how much of that money was commingled. We don't. And so that's a problem. That's a problem we're facing. And without city audits, I can't sit here tonight and tell you what money on the city side we have accurately that was commingled from previous administrations. So we've done everything differently from 12 years ago, the past 2 years. I would love nothing more than have a financial system that we can review throughout the year together in real time with technology in front of all of you with a financial software that gives you real-time data. We've talked about that during the ARPA sessions. I've been working towards that. As you all know, I forwarded you a letter last week from our current city auditor saying that as they started to review it, there were so many issues. Yesterday's price is not today's price. So therefore, that's going to increase. That's going to be on your budget or on your agenda next week. And so, again, talking to Joe, he said this is the first year actually where we're attempting to use a budget and attempting to reflect numbers as accurately as possible. I don't want to put words in Joe's mouth. He could come up here and talk himself. But that's what we're doing right now. That's the challenges that I'm facing, given the number of years that money was commingled in the city. It's difficult. It's a difficult challenge that we're all facing. We didn't create it, but we're here to fix it. And I'm attempting to fix that. I would have loved to got it to you sooner, but I didn't know what money we're working with. I still don't, to be quite honest with you. None of us do until we have those audits showing. Councilman Allison asked me if I had a clue what we would owe back. I don't. I can't sit here tonight and say what we're going to owe back to the state and the feds once these audits are complete. I realize we have to do a budget. That's why I brought this to you all with the calculation as we did. And initially I told Joe, don't carry anything over. Don't carry it all over, because carrying that money over, we're not sure what of that could be carried over, because we're not sure what of that actually was in the correct pots. And then I said, you know what? Carry it over, because until we have the audits, we have to move forward somehow. So carry it over for now. And then once we have those audits, we'll be able to fix some things. Additionally, as we're looking, at the revenues, when we were calculating the lost revenue, I know Councilman Yoder, you said you got to about 1.3, I believe you had said.
Roughly.
In that vicinity. We didn't use all of the revenue in that calculation because we weren't 100% positive that we could use all of those revenues, given the inaccuracies. So I appreciate the comments tonight, and hopefully in 2022, we have numbers, we have audits that accurately depict what we have in accounts, and I can get those to you in real time on a daily basis. And we have that digital plan that we spoke about the other night. I would love nothing more than to be digital, as you all can see. We've had money in council's budget to go digital since I was on council. And so I would love nothing more than talk about finances and talk about fixing finances, which we've been attempting to do for the past 2 years. I think we're in much better position than we were 2 years ago. Do we still have a lot more improvements to make? Obviously. I'm not going to sit here and say that we're where we need to be. Clearly, we know we are not. But do I think we're headed on the right path? I do. Do I think this budget is one that fixes all of the issues that we're facing? No, I don't. Do I think it's the best we could do given the hand we were dealt right now? Yes, I do. And so, with all those extreme, and I'll say extreme because these are extreme circumstances that we are facing, I think what we've been tasked to do, and that includes city council, is monumental. And so until we have a little more information at our disposal, which I feel like we will in the not too distant future, then we can start making decisions based off of numbers that show truly where we stand. Until that point, we're sort of between a rock and a hard place. It's a conundrum that we're facing. This is where we are right now. This is what we need to do. And this is what we are doing. So, I take a little, I took a little bit of issue with that, with some of those comments. I agree with some of them, the fact that we're in a bad position. I disagree with the fact that we're not doing anything differently. I would love nothing more, as I said, to get these to you all sooner, which hopefully we can. But as of right now, given that, we've spent many hours, chief, all of our administration, when you go and say, what do we have here? What do we have in this account? I don't know. I'm not sure what we're supposed to do with that. So that's what we're facing right now. That's why the auditors are saying this is going to take a longer time. That's why we don't have a 2019, a 2020, or 2021 audit yet. And so until we know, this is what we're facing.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Mueller?
Were you done, Vince?
I am.
All right. Then 2 follow-up questions. One of which is, if the administration had the choice of taking on faith the fact that there was $1.4 million in the city's fund balance at this point, or raising taxes to cover the change in the $900,000 increase in the city's expenditures for this year, why did we choose to assume there was a fund balance? And what do we do if there isn't? I guess is my point. If we don't raise taxes this year and that $1.4 million is not there, then what is your plan?
Well, and we had those conversations, and honestly, the solution we came to for the moment was not, we didn't think it was fair to put that on to the taxpayers. Problems from previous administrations or individuals to lay the solution to that onto the backs of the taxpayers right now, when we can't tell the taxpayers right now. So they come to us and say, what's our debt? And I say, I don't know. How are you going to hand them a tax increase? So we didn't think that was fair. So right now, without knowing, we figured carry it over. And then once we know, and I asked Austin White this actually, I literally asked him, is there a way to postpone a little bit until we potentially can have some additional numbers? Unfortunately, right now, no, it's kind of we're in a little bit of an anomaly here. So he said, we do need something, obviously, by December 31st. And so having that information, I thought it just was not fair to do that to the taxpayers right now at this point. Maybe down the road, once we know, possibly.
But you realize the point that's going to put us in budgetarily if we make it to June and you figure out that we're going to have a shortfall and we have to raise taxes in June. Not only is that exceptionally unfair to people who have budgeted for the year with an anticipation of the tax rate being X, but also that puts the city in an extreme financial situation of not being able, we're not collecting those taxes for the full year, which means that we're not, I mean, we could wind up in default. I frankly, I'm not even entirely sure what the mechanism would be for dealing with that. I'm assuming we'd have to borrow money. I'm not sure where we're at with our debt limit right now. Anyway, I think I've made my point there, that I'm not sure that's a wise move from what you're telling us. And I agree with you that I don't feel that it should fall on the backs of the taxpayers. Was there another proposal though?
Yeah, what I brought to you.
Yeah, I mean, in the long run,
Don't misappropriate money.
yes, moving forward.
Until
I guess what I'm saying is we don't have a plan. If we are short money, we don't have a plan to get it from anywhere other than raising taxes, correct?
We don't even know what money we have right now. So, I mean, this is hypothetical. I don't want to get into hypotheticals. We don't know what we have. Once we cross that bridge, then yes, we're going to have to come back together and formulate. I can't say what if we do have money?
Well, to kind of.
What if we have more money than what we're?
Can I make one last point?
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry.
This also then strikes me as a particularly unwise year not to bring somebody else into the finance department. I'm just going to put that out there too, which isn't a good thing to bring up right now. But I'm just saying, if we're looking at an audit that we're being told is going to be costlier and involve more time and involve a harder look at the city's receipts, and we're also talking about potentially making some wild changes in the tax rate mid-year or something like that, possibly, and all of that. All of that sounds to me like we cannot afford to be running as small a finance department as we are. But Adam, anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, to kind of add on to that, let's talk about the director of finance administration, director of administration, whatever we want to call it. That's a costly position, and frankly, it's a position that we should fill. We should find the money to fill it, because it would pay back itself rather quickly, and frankly, bring the expertise to help solve these problems. And the comment I was going to make, I think that maybe Councilwoman Mealy was getting at, was our citizens don't live in hypothetical situations. We have a substantial number of citizens that they budget their tax bill year over year and need to make sure that they have enough in the bank to make ends meet. Our citizens can't afford hypotheticals, unfortunately. I certainly understand the unfortunate happenings at River Valley Transit, 100%. Now I'll quote a comment Councilwoman Mealy has made previously, though, because I agree with it, and she's absolutely right. If you were under investigation from the IRS and your own house, that would not preclude you from paying your bills. I disagree with the notion of we don't know what we're working with, because frankly, under that argument, I would ask this question, actually, and I'd like to know your response.
Sure.
If we don't know if any of these numbers are accurate, why should any of us vote for this budget?
That's why I asked Austin White that. I asked that question.
What's your answer?
Until we have the audit.
Yes or no? Would you vote for this budget?
Yes, I would. Yes, I would.
You would. And
Yes.
why would you vote for it knowing or not knowing what all these numbers are? How was that responsible?
Because with Austin, I asked Austin White, what are we to do right now in the situation that we're in? We have to do something. And I agree with the fact that people have tax, they set up a budget.
Oh, sorry. If Adam and I are trading back and forth being a pain in the ass right now, then
Go at it.
Nobody is calling into question the numbers in this year's budget. I just want to make that clear.
And I
The
would
numbers in
second
this year's
that.
budget are accurate, and I'm not right. So what I'm saying, I guess I feel as though we veered off into this whole idea that there are no real numbers in the city. And that is not true. What is true is that there were expenditures in the past, and no one is clear exactly which ways the funds were used or commingled. We certainly hope that we know what we know, and maybe we don't. So what we cannot for certain confirm is the starting fund balance this year. the expenditures that we make in the course of 2022, we will know and we will track, and they will be accurate. And so more than likely, the number that we, the number that we have at both as income and as expenditures for the year will be more or less accurate, given, you know, a little bit of whatever wiggle room that always gets built in. Sorry, I just want to be clear with the citizens of Williamsport that we're not talking about some sort of strange, weird magic fairy budget that might suddenly turn into a goblin and nobody's quite positive.
And Councilwoman Mealy, to your point, you know, we as council have seen those numbers. We have reviewed those numbers in the finance committee through quarterly reports, all of which are accurate, all of which accurately demonstrate what revenue we bring in, what expenditures go out, and validate the fact that we are presented with a budget deficit or deficit budget. And frankly, Mayor Slaughter, you know, I understand to a degree where you're coming from. All that does, in my opinion, is put an exclamation point on a lot of the concerns that I have. It's even more reason to do this sooner. It's even more reason to do this on a more frequent basis, more collaboratively. It stresses the importance of having a cohesive economic development plan. It stresses working with the numbers that we do know, which is every expenditure in this budget, and making sure and thinking outside the box, ensuring that we are maximizing that as much as possible. So I'll yield the floor.
Anybody? Bueller? Okay, let's try to bring a little bit of levity to this conversation. I think all of this reinforces what Councilwoman Mealy said earlier about having this small tax increase. And for anybody who wants to blame anybody, it's Councilman David Banks. For the sake of my colleagues. Yes, DAVID, BANKS. Yeah, so I mean that it does support that notion, because we do know that if there's a certain amount of money, it's not all of the money, but there's a certain amount of money that we don't have accurate accounting of from long before most of us were on council. To that effect, sorry, Liz. To that effect, you know, if we're trying to be conservative here, well, the other side of conservative, we might have to pad this a little bit, you know, to overcome that shortfall. So once again, it's my fault.
Well said. Okay. Is there anything else from council this evening? Interesting discussion, but we're going to have to vote one way or another. And we all know that if we don't pass a budget, then the city government shuts down, and that's never an option. However, we need to vote. So, Mrs. Frank, on the motion, the original motion, please.
Mr. Yoder,
No.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz. No. Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes. Motion passes 5-2 on first reading. To be revisited in the very near future. Let's move to item 6, please. Ordinance of the, Mrs. Frank, would you read that in short form, please?
An ordinance of the city of Williamsport, county of Lycoming, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, fixing the tax rate for all city purposes for the year 2021.
2022, yes.
It's 2022 on my paper.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. We've passed the budget. The millage rate is 16.22, which is the same as last year. There's no tax increase on what we're voting for now. So I don't think, does anybody have anything to say about that? Apparently not. So Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz. Yes. Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy. Yes. Mr. Allen.
Yes, motion passes 7-0 on first reading. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Let's move to item 7. Would you read that in short form, please, Mrs. Frank?
A resolution authorizing the execution of a intergovernmental peace agreement.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion to remove this from the table? Is there a second? Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion before we vote on removing it from the table? I hear none. Mrs. Frank, on the motion to remove from the table, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mathew,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz. Yes. Mr. Banks.
Yes.
Ms. Mealy. Yes. Mr. Allen.
Yes, motion to remove from the table passes 7-0. Mayor Slaughter.
Good evening again, Council President
evening.
Allison, members of council. What you had before you is a resolution authorizing execution of an intergovernmental lease agreement. And I know we talked about this before, and we even talked about it last night for a minute. We have the ADA plan now with regards to City Hall. John Sanders updated the work plan with regards to those recommendations from our ADA inspector. And so now this is a temporary lease agreement pending the conversation between City Council and administration of our path forward with regards to City Hall or not. And so given that we're temporarily relocated, this is that lease agreement. In the long term, obviously here in the near future, as we said last night, we're going to have to get together to discuss what we would like to do moving forward now that we have that report for the ADA stuff. So.
Okay, questions, discussion on this lease agreement? Mr. Yoder.
Yeah.
You wore out.
There we go. Yeah, so just some general thoughts. I personally don't know that I can support this either for a couple of different reasons. Number one, I mean, so this was a temporary move. And, you know, we had some water damage. We were concerned about airborne mold. We've got a report that says that there is no airborne mold in the building. You know, as far as I understand from OSHA, I don't know that there really is a safety issue being in the building. I understand it's condemned. You know, if we need to remediate it in other ways before moving in, we should certainly do that. The other item of concern is these are city-owned buildings. I certainly understand that. But given everything we just talked about actually with the budget and the uncertainty and everything going on with RBT, I don't know that staying in here, even on a temporary basis, is a good option or even a logical option. And, you know, we continue to talk about regionalization of River Valley Transit for multiple good reasons. It's something that we definitely, it's something we definitely need to. It's something we definitely need to look at to determine if that is the right thing for that organization, for the city. Should that happen, though, we're really back in the predicament that we discussed in the ad hoc committee. That group comprised of members of council and the administration looked at a couple of times leasing an option with another governmental body. We were not comfortable with that for a lot of the same reasons that I think apply to River Valley Transit. And I believe there's some questions related to the Herdick Museum that need to be worked out also that I think impact that as well. So I think structurally and with a lot of the overarching issues, I don't know that it's wise to stay there. But that's just again, one of 7 points. So I'll certainly yield the floor to others.
Catch.
John Sanders isn't here tonight, so maybe Adam, you can answer this question. By the time the ramp is done, it's probably going to be another couple of weeks, if not longer, from looking at the construction out front. The next thing in order to make the City Hall ADA accessible is also the elevator. And from what I remember with the conversations over the years now, that once the elevator is taken apart, it's going to take at least 6 to 8 months. Am I remembering this correctly?
You are correct.
So therefore, once the ramp is done, I don't know where we've been with the elevator at this point, where we've gone budget-wise. Can anybody, does anybody else remember where we stand with that at all? As far as if we're going after fixing the elevator? I don't, with everything that's going on in City Hall, I can't, it's just on hold.
Yeah.
We'd have to
Yeah.
do another RFP.
Yeah.
So if we do another RFP, you're talking another couple of months. So therefore, you're talking at least another year before we could actually get into City Hall, because without the elevator, we cannot hold public meetings because our rooms will not be accessible. Am I talking this correctly at this point?
I believe so.
So we're talking at least a good year.
That's more of a question for John Sander.
Right.
But, he put that work plan together with the elevator and the ramp. I don't know if it'll be a year or not. I know with the ramp will be set. I think that's being set on Tuesday, I believe. And then I know John sent an email. I could pull it up. And then the elevator, we'd have to obviously revisit that. So that's why I think, what I said initially, we have to get together again soon to decide. And from my understanding, if we make the determination to go back in, then we fall under all of those ADA improvements as well. And that's what John is starting to put into the work plan. Some our Public Works Department can do, some they can't. So we're working through that right now as well. What they'll be able to handle, which is door handles, things of that nature. But the larger construction projects, they will not. And so there's pieces of the work plan that we can do in-house. There's pieces that we can't. So I think we all need to get together very soon here to discuss. You have to come up here though. Adam, you have to come up to the mic.
If you've all read through the ADA plan that was delivered to us recently, it does involve removing load-bearing walls to make restrooms more accessible, making hallways more accessible. So, you're going to have to put that out to bid before you move back in. You've got a lot of work to do before you can actually move back into City Hall.
So you're absolutely right. I guess the point that I'm making is, when we went through this process last year, okay, we as a group came to a resolution that was adopted that was supported by the administration publicly, that was supported by City Council and adopted accordingly. That included going through, putting a plan together, not just for the ADA stuff, which we are doing, and we have stalled because of the situation we're in with City Hall right now, but included renovating City Hall, including, working through the issues that we experience ourselves. I certainly recognize whatever the plan looks like, even if it's a phased approach, we would need to move people, 100% agreed. But, we came to that resolution in March. And frankly, I'm of the impression that, the same arguments that we made for staying in City Hall are going to be applicable probably as we work through some of those additional questions related to here. We're going to need somewhere to house our police. And, I know we temporarily do, but, that may not always be the case. And so we're going to need to put that plan together at some point. Frankly, we should have had that together by now because it's been, what, 9 months roughly? And we are literally talking about rehashing the same issue that has been rehashed 5 times now. And
I don't disagree with you.
so I just, I understand certainly where you're coming from as well. That's part of the planning process, a part of the process that was outlined in that recommendation. I could be wrong. I don't see anything changing long-term as far as the big issue of housing particular departments, right? I don't know. I think that's going to continue to be the case. And that is a big reason why it was fiscally made sense to stay in City Hall. I suspect that will probably still be the case. And
$20
so,
million.
huh?
$20 million.
$20 million, huh? I would love to see where you're coming up with that. And I'm absolutely serious, because
Well, we're going to find out. Gannett Fleming will be here on the 16th to do a walkthrough of City Hall to put together an updated proposal.
perfect.
And
I
you're
just
more than
want to
welcome
go, I
join
just
them.
want to go back to the lease. Okay, the only reason I brought up the elevator and how long it was going to take is because this is a 5-year lease that we're looking at.
With a 60-day out clause.
Okay, I want to make sure,
Jill Nagy is on Zoom, but I
Okay.
don't think that we'll be able to hear her. If you'd like me to call her on my cell phone, put the phone over by Randy's microphone, you're more than welcome to ask her any questions, but there is a 60-day out clause.
that's all I want to make sure, that there is a 60-day out clause, because we cannot move back in there until that elevator is done. Okay, that's one of the major things. Other things maybe can be done, however, when we find out all the other information, okay? But I just want to make sure there's a clause in there that we're not stuck for 5 years in where we're at this point, okay? Because there are a lot of variables still. There's still a lot of questions of where we're at.
So it was reviewed by Austin White for the 6th.
Okay, as long as there's a 60-day clause, okay. I'm finished now. You can go back at him.
I think,
How about you, Dave? Are you ready?
yeah, I think another thing, having to wait longer on the elevator now, that price is going to be significantly more if we RFP at this point, just like everything else has gone up. And I did vote in favor of the original plan, but I do think the dynamics have changed since then, that we know the extent of some of the other things we need to do in City Hall. And there was one big problem I had with City Hall all along. I think we all did. Number one, with the police house there, that just doesn't work in this day and age anymore. The setup that we had there, and just the general security of that building, I don't think lends itself to a modern, safe, efficient government, which I think it's a beautiful building. It serves the city well for a time. I really think we need to be forward-looking as far as meeting the technology needs, everything that's needed in this day and age to deliver the services that we need to do in an efficient way, and to be able to communicate with each other in an efficient way. So, I have changed my mind on that. We'll have to weigh it out. I think, yeah, we're kind of in betwixt and in between right now, which isn't the greatest situation. I'm not sure about the police. I had heard at one point that they would like to stay downtown and somewhat in the configuration it's in. I don't know how well that's working, but that can all be worked out. I just don't think the police should go back into City Hall, the old City Hall. And I don't know how we get around that cost effectively. Whereas I think the environs that we're in now are more cost effective. So that's my take on it.
As I've said from the beginning, I think it really depends on a large number of questions that I don't particularly feel comfortable with the answers we've received yet to. The whole question of does the city own these structures, which it seems that we do. If so, are we responsible for maintenance on these structures? And there are a lot of rabbit holes to go down in this discussion of where we belong and what the best situation is for city government moving forward. Although I would agree with you that the police and the rest of city government sharing quarters was not a particularly comfortable arrangement. In some ways, I think that everyone being close together, increases the level of interaction that they have, which is a positive thing. But the setup that we had wasn't really secure enough for the way in which we had it arranged. But all of that said, realistically speaking, we're here. So
There's no definite.
To Bonnie's point, really, we're just looking at the lease, which has had a couple of the weird little kinks and inconsistencies worked out, and I think we'll have to do to get us through until we make a final decision about our final resting place. Not to be too somber about it, and, or at least currently final resting place. I agree that the situation, I kind of agree with Adam. I'm not entirely happy about it, but and perhaps particularly not with the way in which we moved out of City Hall and what I perceive as maybe some added expense that we didn't need to incur to move quickly when there wasn't really a need to move quickly. But all of that, once again, is water under the bridge. We're here and we need a lease agreement to allow us to stay here. Right? Yeah. Water through the walls, whatever you want to look at it as. And this is a reasonable rate. We hope that it will be sufficient to cover the city's actual occupancy. I suspect that we will see additional costs for the city over and above this as we move forward and we get a greater understanding of the arrangement that we're in here. But we have a lease that's been approved by the FTA, been approved by the state, and now it just needs to be approved by us. And I think that probably we should just go ahead and make certain that we're on the same page with the FTA and the state on this, because I think it is in our best interest to be on the same page as the FTA and the state when we're using buildings that were built with their money. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Sorry, I might have 2 more
Oh,
cents.
you have them.
Mr. Winter, you mentioned that there is a study being conducted right now, yet again of City Hall by Gannett Filming. Is that correct?
They're going to come through, look at the building and give us updated numbers from their previous study to what currently is happening.
How are we paying for that? Because I don't remember that coming to us.
It is under the $20,000 mark and is a professional service.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Thanks.
If we're going to discuss this anyway, then are we also paying them to come over here and look at these structures and tell us what they need? Because these are also city-owned buildings and we, I think, need to understand our obligations here as well.
And
are we paying them to evaluate the transit elements of this structure so that we have a second opinion on whether or not we can legitimately occupy and or own this structure?
The biggest intention at the moment was to get the answers for you on City Hall. If you would like a full analysis, we'll certainly put it out for an RFP and you're looking at.
I've been asking for that for 2 months.
And that was actually a
I've
recommendation
discussed it
of
with the city engineer.
ad hoc.
I've discussed it with the mayor and I've discussed it with you.
Yep. And that was.
I'm sorry. I mean, that's exactly, I had understood we were doing that. I was waiting to get the RFP from the engineer. And then when I asked him for it, he said, that's a waste of money. So, and he told me that last night when I asked him for it after 2 months of me waiting
I
to
can
see
follow
it.
up with John and see.
Okay, because I think that is exactly the analysis that I've asked for in an executive session with you. I've asked John for it directly. I've asked Jill for it. I've asked you, Adam. I've asked you, Mayor. I think that we need to evaluate the entire situation, not just City Hall. I think we all have a vague understanding of the needs of City Hall. Yes, it would help to have costs, but I would like a second opinion on the transit elements of these two buildings, on the city's obligation to pay for repairs in these two buildings. I would like to understand the structural needs of these two buildings as well. I understand that they're less, but that doesn't make it unimportant. And I'm not, I also understand the lag time, Mr. Winder. I just think if we're looking for a complete picture, then we're looking for a complete picture, and City Hall is not the complete picture.
Now, the one question you just posed there was the city's obligation to repairs to this building or TT1.
Mhm.
The obligation for infrastructure is on River Valley Transit. That's why you would be charged rent for your lease payment would go into an account.
But River
to
Valley
all the
Transit is
upgrades.
the city, Mr. Winder. And
I
if we split River Valley Transit off into an authority, then the buildings become the property of the city.
Liz, can I jump in and give a prime example of what you're getting at?
Yeah.
So I referenced earlier, when we went through this last time, we had an offer to lease from the county. They offered us a rate cheaper than what we're paying in this lease. In that rate was included maintenance, upkeep of the building. We were on the hook for none of that. Under this structure, we're not only paying more money for rent, but we don't have any of that covered under that cost. We are also on the hook for that because it is a city-owned property, to my knowledge. I think that's what you're getting at, Liz. And we need to understand if, once again, we're going to pay for another study, which, Lauren, can you confirm? I thought that threshold needed to, or I thought that had to come before council.
If it's an agreement, it should come before council.
Okay.
The threshold applies to buying goods and goods.
Goods.
It's really you don't have to go through the bidding process. If it's less than, I think it's 21,000, and
Okay.
probably it'll go up again next year.
Okay. So legally, we should get that going ASAP if we're going to do this again. But yet again, if we're going to pay for yet another study, we need to make sure, to Liz's point, that it is comprehensive, because we are still on the hook for this if we are going to look at this yet one more time. I think that's what you were getting at.
That is what I'm getting at. I think what I'm actually getting at is that I've heard a handful of different things about whether or not we're on the hook for it. And while I have no reason not to believe them, because I've heard a handful of different things, I would prefer to have a second opinion on the matter.
Mhm.
I think is my point. We have been for a long time in a sort of a murky place in terms of our relationship with River Valley Transit. This, to me, really only ups the ante on that murkiness. And so I think that it is in our best interest to have someone who is not affiliated with either River Valley Transit or the city give us a determination on long-term occupancy of these structures, our financial obligations in that case, and the relationship with RVT that we would need to continue to have to sort of be co-proprietors of the buildings. That is to say, you know what I mean? I've heard a number of different scenarios described. I'm open to any of them, but I just want to understand what our best route is and what our legal route is there, so that we're not once again finding ourselves on the outs with the state of the feds because of an occupation of this structure.
Can I just ask this question, because Jill Nagy is on Zoom and RVT is going to have to pay her for this time if she's not able to answer any questions?
I don't
Can we
think that
just
she
let her-
Adam, because I was on Zoom and
Right, that's what I'm saying. She can't answer any questions. I offered to call her on my phone so that you guys could ask her questions.
Sure.
But we never got a real response to that. So can we either let her go off of Zoom or something?
Yeah, if we can't communicate.
Right.
So to your point about the money, and in the square footage or the rent we're paying per square foot, I think that could have been lower I believe the mayor said at one point, because we're a governmental entity, but we decided to pay market rate.
I was of the impression that we're actually paying the intergovernmental rate. I thought the market rate was 14, intergovernmental was 11, and this reflects 11. If you're right, I mean, I was of the other opinion.
What?
or
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear-
We've been saying we're paying market rate.
Can you hear me?
Fair market rate is the same rate that was just given to CTL. There was a range from $11 to $14.
Okay, so it's a
square
range.
foot, based upon the analysis done by Fish Real Estate.
Okay. So,
I don't remember that, but okay. I'll have to double check that.
I don't.
And
we have
in
the
in
governmental
any
rate?
event, it is what it is.
Sorry?
The governmental rate, do we have that?
Basically,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
you're
Are
there.
you able to
Yes.
hear me?
Yes. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. Hi, Jill.
Hello.
Okay, so,
ask her about the reduction for government.
in the rate,
Jill, can you explain why the government agencies could get a reduction in the rental rate for this building?
Yeah, there is some provision in the act that since we're doing like-kind services, meaning streets and parks are doing services for the building, we're allowed to give a reduction, which I got cleared by the Federal Transit Administration because of some of the things that Streets and Parks does for the facility.
so I think in the interest of, being, not taking advantage of that and having a fair playing field, we didn't take that reduction. But no, I did some quick math. We're paying 11 per square foot per year. And it's 11,727 square feet. That's roughly 129,000 a year. So I think the question is, if it goes beyond, if something happens that it's more than 129,000 significantly, we're kind of obligated to make that difference up. Is that correct? Not kind of, I mean, I think that's the clarity that we need, that,
Right, I mean,
because we're saying,
there's a lot of unknowns at the moment. I mean, if RBT goes to an authority, is the city going to hold on these buildings or are they going to transfer them to the authority?
yeah, we don't know that.
Right, so there's that question. That's the first one, because that changes the dynamics drastically because the city's no longer on the hook. It's strictly the authority that's on the hook. I know that was thrown around a little bit when we started talking about the authority versus the city and buildings and this and that, The other thing is like that money, and we'll use CTL, we'll use the city who technically is using space right now and should be paying. All that money would go into the non-transit account for these buildings. So if we have no issues over the next, let's just say 5 years, because things are in really good shape in these buildings, that money is just building. It's not being used for anything else. It's not being taken out for anything else because it's not allowed to be. That is strictly non-transit money. You have your transit money that is strictly transit money, can only be used for operations of the bus. You have your non-transit that the state says you can only use for non-transit items pertaining to your buildings, et cetera, things of that nature. So that pot of money would only grow. Now, if something major would happen, then yes, absolutely, we'd have to look at different things, but the dynamics of it is part of this building is still transit, so there's a chance that there could be some capital money that comes in from the state or federal government to cover the portion of that money that is transit.
So it's not a simple
Right, I mean,
cut and dry. There's a
essentially,
lot
you're
of,
gonna roll the dice no matter how you look at it,
Yeah.
whether you stay here, you go somewhere else, you go to back to City Hall, you're rolling the dice on everything because you're still gonna try to balance a budget with the hopes that you have enough money to cover any expense that ever happens.
Correct. Yeah.
It's like you guys keep using the analogy of your house. It's the same thing. I own a house in Newbury. Something happens, I gotta hope I got the money. If I don't, guess what? I'm gonna figure out a way to come up with it, whether it's go to the bank or do something, I gotta come up with it. There's not a whole lot of difference there.
Well, we don't know. There's a lot we don't know. There's more we don't know than we do know, right?
Unfortunately, there's no crystal ball that's gonna
Right,
say
yeah.
that this could happen or that could happen.
Yeah.
You could put a brand new heating or air conditioning unit in the building and
Right.
it's bad tomorrow. You can
Well-
buy a brand new car right now that breaks down tomorrow.
Yeah. But in the sense of, the future of RBT is going to affect what kind of lease we have or what kind of ownership we have or don't have. So there's still, those are the big kind of unknowns that.
And just one final comment, Mr. Wendy, there's always unknowns, 100% agreed. The variables in this problem are always going to change. There are always going to be opportunities presented to us that may be more appealing. At some point, we need to make a decision and stick to it. If we're gonna look at this one more time for like a fifth or sixth time, I mean, so be it. But the exact same thing that we are experiencing now with other new variables that we want to consider is going to happen again. Let's make sure, if we're going to look at this again, that we make a decision and stick to it. Because if we don't do that, there's going to be 7 new people sitting up here in 10 years and maybe a brand new mayor that are going to be sitting here thinking, thanks, guys.
Right. Yeah.
I agree with you 100%. The can's been kicked down the road for a long time. My personal opinion, I wouldn't dump any money into City Hall for another study. It's just my opinion. I think we're just wasting money. There's, like you said, there's been 5 studies done already. And the problems have only gotten worse because they've been prolonged for so long because there's not money to repair City Hall the way it needs repaired.
Mrs. Katz?
I'm going to go back. We're talking about the lease.
Yeah, that's what I was.
All right. I mean, we have to pay rent, okay? All of our offices
Right.
are in these buildings. We have to pay rent. We can't be squatters, okay? I don't think that could legally be done, okay? It would come back very bad on us.
Yeah.
So therefore, we have to talk about this lease. If this states a 5-year lease with a 60-day out clause, to me, what we should do is say yes to the lease because we need a place to conduct our business. Because we cannot move back into City Hall right at the moment, even if everything was done, it's still going to take a while for everything to get done.
Mhm.
So to me, we're talking about the lease.
We are, I agree. And so you're calling for the vote, which we'll have. I think that talking about the lease opened up the larger question, though, that we are still going to have to figure that out. So we needed to have that conversation as well.
You did mention security a little while ago.
Yeah.
And I just would like to reiterate a point that you brought up, I believe, Monday night, about our clerk's location in this building, which is not secure at all. So yeah, I just want to make sure that that's
It
in the
is.
progress.
I had a
Okay.
conversation with the mayor.
Great. Okay.
We had a good conversation about it, and I think we'll all be satisfied with it. So our esteemed councilwoman, Bonnie Katz, has called for the vote. Mrs. Frank, on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder,
No.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz, Mr. Banks, Ms. Mealy, Mr. Allison.
Yes, motion passes 6-1. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Okay. We'll move to item 8. Would you read that in short form, please, Mrs. Frank?
Resolution authorizing the execution of a contract agreement between the City of Williamsport and city employees, Local 2674, ASME District Council 86. And this first one is for the city employees.
City employees. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion and second from council?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Welcome, Ms. Steele. How are
Thank you
you
very
doing?
much. Good evening, President Allison and members of council. Tonight, I have before you a summary of the items that were negotiated between ASCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, which represent the City Hall employee union employees, and as well as the potential financial impact of those changes on the city.
Mhm.
The administration negotiated these items on October 7th and October 21st. And we brought them in front of the Finance Committee on Tuesday, November 16th.
Thank you, Ms. Steele. This was reviewed in finance at one point. Briefly. it was.
Well, and it was reviewed after that, I believe, by the full body of council and
Yeah.
an executive session. And yeah, there
Right.
have been, I'm not really sure that flipping it to finance is going to be germane at this point.
Mhm.
Because our discussion in finance was limited and we passed it on with it, or we recommended that it be further examined. Primarily because I think I specifically had questions about the financial impact on the city's bottom line of the contract. Something, an estimate that we usually receive as part of the contract model that hadn't been prepared in this case.
Yeah.
But that said, the impact of the city's bottom line appeared to be relatively minimal. I mean, there are pay increases negotiated within the contract, and we all know that those will have an impact on this current year's budget. They will increase the budget, the salary numbers in those lines. But with the exception of that, specifically in terms of city employees, and I wasn't able to attend the entire executive session regarding this, so I deferred to the members of council who might have a stronger opinion. But the city employees contract has a relatively minimal impact on the budget otherwise.
I'll open it up to the floor for those who want to comment.
Okay, always just making sure it's on.
Yeah.
All right, good evening.
Good evening.
So yes, we did review the contract. I don't want to speak for other members of council, but I know personally an issue I had pertains specifically to one clause. And I believe what we'd have to do, or what I would have to do, is try to make a motion to amend the contract to remove a clause of the contract. Is that correct, Norm?
Yes, I believe that might be, is that the streets and parks one you're talking about?
I believe it's both of them.
Okay.
I believe so.
Yes.
Yeah, the clause I'm specifically citing is that there would be no layoffs at all. I don't feel comfortable having that in there.
1310.
I'm sorry?
So in
It's
the current
reductions.
contract, it's Article 13.10. Okay. What you're referencing, Mr. Foley.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That I do not feel comfortable with that in any contract. I'm not singling out this particular contract. I wouldn't feel comfortable with that in any contract. I think by doing so, we back ourselves into a corner. I hope that we wouldn't have to lay anybody off at all. But again, I've got to do what I was elected to do and protect the best interests of all the constituents and residents in the city. And to do that, I don't feel that allowing this to remain in the contract is a good idea. And with that, I will yield the floor to anybody else that has a comment.
Can I just?
Yes, sir.
clarify one thing, and it doesn't change anything you've said, but the former contract said for the first year of this contract, 2019, there shall be no layoff to this bargaining unit. That was X'd out. The new language is for the term of this agreement, there shall be no reduction in the workforce. So it just doesn't speak to layoffs. And there's some discussion about what that language does mean. So, but just, yeah, just so the public.
That is specifically what I was.
Yes, that's the one you're talking to, yeah. Oh, Dave.
This, I'm not sure who this goes to, Molly, you or Norm, but if we do amend the contract, then that has to go back to be re-ratified by the union, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the point that I'd like to make here is we're going to give them a bargaining chip for other changes. We can approve this contract now and set it. But if we go back, I don't want to say that what they should bargain for, but I know what I would bargain for, and I would use that as the issue is we probably won't lay anybody off. What I don't want to do is give the union, both us not laying anybody off because of circumstance, and then something that might cost us actual real money, down the line. So, or immediately, early. So just to be fair, I don't like the clause either. It shouldn't be either. But however, I want to keep what we have because I think it's that's what I get.
I would second a lot of Councilman Filizzi's comments, but I certainly understand that, Councilman Banks, and I certainly appreciate that opinion and thought, and there's truth to it. You're certainly right. At least for me, this was specifically discussed in finance. I mean, none of us want to do that at all. I don't, with this group of employees and this other group of employees that are on the agenda tonight, we've literally talked about they're about as bare bones as we can get. I fully acknowledge that. I just simply think that those are the decisions that factor into budget time. I just think that's where those decisions need to be made. And frankly, I think the flexibility is worth the flexibility of how we offer services within those if we need it in an event of emergency. I personally think that's worth it. So I understand and respect where you're coming from, but a little bit of a different opinion, but thank you for sharing that, Dave.
Ms. Mealy.
I won't say anything about the next one, I swear to God. Unless Randy asks me to.
Strike that from the minutes. Strike that from the minutes.
But I'm going to side with Dave's logic on this one. I would like to see, and I understand that by the time that we revisit these contracts, I am not likely to be sitting here. It's entirely possible that several members of the administration won't necessarily be sitting there either. So, we have completed a number of contracts this year, most of which will run us through 2023, if not longer. And so this request likely falls on somewhat deaf ears, but when the administration is negotiating a contract, I would say that I think it would be useful to have a member of council involved as part of that negotiation. That did not happen in this instance. And consequently, when we make a request and when we say that we don't like a given codicil, that's because we didn't know that it existed until this had already been finalized by the union. And had we had input earlier, we might have been able to achieve a different contract outcome. And I think that it would have been preferable to all of us. But we've talked a lot about water under the bridge this evening in so many contexts. And this is just another one. Given that we have a contract that's been ratified by the union, ratified by the city, with the exception of city council's vote, I agree with Councilman Banks that I think the wisest option that council has is to move forward with these contracts as executed, given the unlikely event that we would be looking to lay someone off in these already relatively sparsely staffed departments. So I'll be voting in support of the contract tonight.
Mrs. Katz.
They probably put this in knowing what the budgets are at this point. I mean, that's when you really look at this. I do agree with you, Vince, that, I don't think any of us like this because it ties our hands. It really does, just in case. And, but the just in case, when we look at who we have employed, we're down to the bare bones. We really are down to the bare bones. When you look at what the workforce was many years ago, it's amazing how we are sustaining our city with what we have employed. It's just very frustrating that a statement can create such havoc. And it's just one sentence that is bothering all of us. And I think it has bothered all of us. And, but again, we have a workforce that I think we appreciate tremendously. And I think that's what we have to go with at this point. And let them know that we don't like the fact that we can't lay them off, just in case. But I don't think that would happen. I really don't, because we need everybody that's there. And that's what it boils down to. We need everybody. I mean, when we look at what we have budgeted, where we're at, we see what our needs are. It's not our wants, it's our needs to run this city, period. So I will vote for this contract.
Ms. Steele, how many employees does this cover? Was it 13? 12.
Mhm.
So we're not talking a lot of people to start with.
Yes.
Other-
Well, no, I don't know if anybody else has any other comments. I'm comfortable motioning to amend this. I'm thinking we may not have the votes to change that, but nonetheless, I'm comfortable making a motion. I'll make a motion to amend the contract, Article 1310, to eliminate it.
Okay, motion to amend, moved and seconded to eliminate Article 1310. And we've discussed it. So Mrs. Frank, on the motion to amend, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
No.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz, Mr. Banks,
No.
Ms. Mealy, Mr. Allison.
No. Motion fails. 2 in favor, 5 not in favor. So we're back to the original motion. Are there any other comments? There are savings in here for that affect new employees. So that's gonna affect future budgets to save money for the city. So lots of things to consider. Okay, Mrs. Frank, on the original motion, please.
Mr. Yoder,
No.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
No.
Mrs. Katz. Mr. Banks. Ms. Mealy. Mr. Allison.
Yes, motion passes 5-2. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. We'll move to item 9. Would you read that in short form, please, Mrs. Frank?
Resolution authorizing the execution of a contract agreement between the city of Williamsport and Streets and Parks and Flood Control Employees Local 2674, ASME District Council 86, AFL-CIO.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion from council?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Ms. Steele.
Thank you. So the Department of Streets, Parks and Flood Control is also unionized by ASCME. And again, this contract would cover them from 2022 through 2025. The administration negotiated on August 25th and September 1st. And again, before you, you have a summary of the changes as well as a summary of how this would financially affect the city.
Mhm. Thank you, Ms. Steele. Comments and questions again? Mr. Pelisi, yeah.
Again, this is this contract contains the same language,
Yes.
correct?
Does.
That's all I needed to know. So even though I know it's going to fail, I'm still going to make a motion to amend this contract to remove, Adam, what's the
13.11, 13.11.
13.11 from the contract.
Moved and seconded to amend the contract to remove item 13.11. Mrs. Franklin, the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
No.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz. Mrs. Katz?
No.
Mr. Banks? Ms. Mealy?
No.
Mr. Allison?
No. Motion does not pass 2-5. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. And we're back to the original motion on the contract as a whole. Comments or questions? And I believe this covers 26
Correct.
employees, which we've talked about before. There's been quite a few reductions over the years. Most significantly in the levy crew that went at one time was 9 is now 2. And we've talked about that and how we're going to have to remedy that in the future with some different entity taking care of the levy or looking over it. Okay, any more discussion on the contract as a whole? I don't see any. Mrs. Frank, on the original motion, please.
Mr. Yoder,
No.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
No.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes, motion passes 5-2. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Okay, we'll move. Thank you, Ms. Steele. We'll move to item 11. Mr. Livermore. Mrs. Frank, would you read that in short form, please?
A resolution awarding the installation of a PVC membrane swimming pool lining system at Memorial Pool.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion and second from council?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Welcome, Mr. Livermore.
Good evening, President Allison, member of council. What you have here is a resolution awarding the installation of a PVC membrane swimming pool liner system in Memorial Pool. Pool warranty has a 10-year warranty on it. It also has a 10-year weld warranty on it. All other products, fasteners, caulk fittings, et cetera, has a 1-year. We have to talk to the contractor for the best option. Obviously, it was 2. Option 1 has a lot of maintenance to it. Option 2 has 0 maintenance, which could save minimal of $10,000 a year for maintenance cost. Last liner lasted over 20 years. There will be a pressure test that they'll do because of the reason if there's a leak behind it, they put the liner in, you can get an air pocket behind it. It'll start filling up and then we'll have bigger issues. So that'll be done. The cost of the liner is $129,105, not to exceed that. This was reviewed in Finance Committee with a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Livermore.
This was sent from the Finance Committee with a positive recommendation. The one item that the Finance Committee recommended further discussion on with this item, the pool liner seems to be the wisest system of securing the pool. And our last one, according to Mr. Winder, lasted us 20 years. So likely a wise investment to Mr. Livermore. Mr. Winder estimated that it might save us as much as $10,000 a year in maintenance costs. At that point, it basically pays for itself. But the one question that we sent to the full body of council was the question of the funding. The administration is currently anticipating funding it with the $112,000 that's in our memorial pool fund, which was provided, I believe, although I defer to Mr. Pavlak, for maintenance of the pool. We've been setting aside $2,000 a year for a total of $12,000 in that line toward maintenance, but there was originally a $100,000 request related to the pool, or gift related to the pool, for maintenance of the pool. Certainly, we could use those funds for this membrane. It was the concern, I think, of 2 out of 3 members of the Finance Committee, Ms. Katz and I, but not shared by Mr. Yoder, that if we use these funds for this element of the pool, it might put us in the position of having some other emergency pool fix needed at some point that the city did not have the funding for. This could also be funded out of the American Rescue Plan funds that we received. If we were to do that, of course, I would recommend that we table this item for this evening and revisit it in the new year when we have that plan in place for sort of first round spending of the funding. It is not particularly timely if we order it 3 weeks from now instead of today. It wouldn't affect the installation of it, the pool being ready by the beginning of May for users. So we simply left that debate up, I guess, because council and the administration are arriving at an agreement on what we will be funding with that American Rescue Plan Act funding. That was not a decision the Finance Committee felt comfortable making on its own, especially because we didn't agree. So we brought it to you guys and just said, there is technically, I believe, money in the budget. It just seemed as though it might be wise to leave that money where it is in case we have another emergency and utilize the rescue plan funding that's available to us. How about it, guys?
Scats? Oh, sorry.
Yes, Liz and I both agreed that we don't feel the money should be depleted from the pool account. We've been on council long enough to know the problems that occur with the pool every year. There's always something that comes up. And if we deplete that account, then where are we going to find the money? We are able to use ARPA money for this. It's in there that you can use it for the pools. So why would we deplete something that down the line we may need? I do have a question for you, Scott. When you said that you were going to go for, they were going to check for leaks, first of all, is that incorporated into the cost?
That would be incorporated into the 129,000 for the max not to exceed. Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to double check with that. But other than that, like we said, we would like to discuss this with the rest of council because this is where we felt, Liz and I felt, Mr. Yoder thought we should deplete the account. And so we totally disagree on this. We've been disagreeing all night, haven't we?
That kind of night.
What can we say? But that's what my feelings are. I don't want to see this account go down. And Joe, if I remember correctly, this was $100,000. 50,000 was supposed to be for maintenance, 50,000 for operation.
I went and dug in City Hall to find the initial donation. There was 100,000 from an anonymous donor or a donor who wished to remain anonymous. But the administration at that point earmarked 50 for the pool renovation and 50 for future maintenance. And I believe that year or the year after, I think it was 2015, maybe, council set up the pool fund to support down the road maintenance for the features, whatnot that may malfunction or need repaired or updated. So that's my understanding of setting aside that, I think initial around $100,000, and the general fund's been kicking in 2,000 per year.
Okay, thank you, Joe. That's all.
Yeah, I can see where both sides are coming from. And this might be a question more for you, Mr. Winder, because you're so new, Scott. I guess my question is, do we think we really need $100,000 in that account for repairs? What do the repairs, I feel like probably most of the repairs for this pool came from the fact that it was constantly leaking and you're constantly patching and looking for this leak and looking for that leak. So now that we have this issue addressed, what is a reasonable amount of money to keep in that account? Would you say to have on hand in case of an emergency? And I know that might be a hard question to ask. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is, could we do a 60-40 split? Could we do 60 from ARPA, 40 from the account that we currently have, leaving money in the account and not completely using ARPA funds?
I would say that's a better idea. I mean, the hopes would be that the liner would definitely cut back on cost. I mean, a lot of the costs were painting of the pool, crack repairs to the concrete. We did repair 2 breaks in the pipes previously this year. The rest of the piping is pretty new. The filters are new, the pumps are new. I mean, the pool at this point should be in really good shape for the next 10 years with the liner.
So I agree. I think we should probably table this tonight. And I think that it would be helpful if we could get, like, say, the last 10 years, every year, how much did it cost us to repair the pool? And then let's factor out how much of that money was related to the major issue that we've now dealt with. And then maybe we can come up with a better solution as opposed to completely expending the account or completely using ARPA funds.
And the only other thing I would suggest is Mr. Livermore reach out to the company and see how long they're willing to hold that price.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I feel like I should probably just get this off my chest at this point. I was the anonymous donor of the 100. That was a joke. That was a joke. That was a joke.
Mr. Palooza. Oh, okay. Oh, man. Don't-
I just wanted to freestyle for a little while. So. I'm practically speaking, if we go with, I'm talking to you, Joe, actually. If we go with the ARPA funds, would they be released in time to get this thing paid for, to have it installed by the time the season rolls around to use it? Like, do we know when the ARPA funds will be released and usable?
We have our funds.
Well, okay, that's second round, because I think we had already allocated most of the first round, right?
No.
No, okay. Oh, right. Okay, I withdraw anything I just said.
The only other thing that I could stress is that we wouldn't actually pay for it till the installation was complete in the spring.
Okay. Good. Well, that would give us time to figure it out.
I just had one quick question. And Mr. Winder, you actually already answered a little bit of the question I had. I guess it's for both of you gentlemen. Again, I do agree that we should table this, but given the current climate that we're in with supply chain and and the price of everything going up so quickly and rampantly, this price that we've been given, is there a time? How long do we have it? How is this price good for?
That's what Mr. Livermore is going to reach out to the company and find out for sure, how long
Right.
they're willing to hold that price.
So there's no
Yeah.
pre-existing timeline on how good this price is, not that we know of yet.
Not that we're aware of. The company was really good. They came out and, they worked with us from the very beginning and kind of point us in a direction of what type of liner we wanted, what the best bang for our buck was to say what would last the longest. And then they were the lowest bidder in the end, once it went on pen bid.
Okay. And then the only other question I'd have then, all these materials, do they currently have on hand?
It sounds as though they do, because if we would have got to some pen bid a little bit sooner, they were actually going to do it in the fall.
Okay. Because that would have been my, with tabling it, which I think is the responsible thing to do right now. But what I was wondering is, with every week that went by that we would, to discuss this further, to wait until January, which again, I think is a good idea. That's just another week that somebody else could call up and say, hey, I need a pool liner. And then by the time it comes back around to us, we could finally agree on it and say, yes, okay, let's get the pool liner. And they could say, we don't
Sorry
have
about-
it.
Yeah, sorry about your luck. They said, Mr. Livermore will reach out to the company tomorrow. We can come back next Thursday or even send out an email saying this is how long they're willing to hold the price. And maybe that makes it so that next week we may have to untable it, approve it, and just work out the funding later, because I don't believe the funding is actually in the resolution to identify how you're paying for it. I believe it's inevitable that we need it. It's just a matter of how exactly we want to pay for it.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I mean, that's new information, right? If we don't have to pay for this until it's installed, then we have time to figure out the logistics of how we're paying for it. So maybe I take back my statement and agreeing with tabling. Maybe we should just pass this, and we have until the middle of next year to figure this issue out, but let's not hold this. Yeah, let's not hold this up any longer.
I'm fine with that. And just to quickly explain the counter argument, I certainly understand where Bonnie and Liz are coming from. It's a very valid point and argument. I just simply think, given that the pool will be in a much better position, $100,000 put in somewhere else will compound faster so that we can put that money and recoup that account faster. That's simply the counter argument. So.
To clarify real quick, Mr. Yoder, you're referring that the money be put into somewhere else, meaning an interest-bearing account?
Land Bank, Redevelopment Authority, Economic Development. I mean, there's numerous types of things that we have. Correct. Yeah. And that's just simply the counter argument that we discussed in finance. So. Yep.
And I guess the other thing you can think about is the amount of money we're going to save in water with this liner. So that's also more money moving forward that we're going to save that can go somewhere else in the general fund. Because the water amount was astronomical. In 2019, when the pool was actually operational, we had to leave the water flow on the entire time the pool was essentially open for the season. So we
just working on cannonballs.
Okay, Mrs. You calling for the vote?
I just want to say, Liz and I are just very, very hesitant. We've lived with this too long, knowing all the problems. And I think that's where we're coming from. And we're getting so-called guarantees, but how good are those guarantees also?
Right.
And, people have been so upset with the pool being closed. And we want to run this as efficiently as possible. But I also agree with you that, we could use the money, to make money. And that's what we've been saying all along with the ARPA money. And I agree with you totally on that.
Yeah.
I just don't want to see 3, 4, 5 years down the line when something happens to that pool and then we have no money in an account somewhere. That's the problem.
No, understood. So to Councilman Mackey's point, if passing this today locks us in to the pricing, we get it going and we can finalize the funding after the fact, I'm okay with that. I mean, let's do it. It's no big deal at that point. We've beat this enough, probably. We've beat a lot of these enough. And I'm big part of it. I'm the guilty party, so I'll fully admit that. It's all right.
Randy, let's go for the pool.
So, all right, let's dive right in, right? Okay. Yeah. We're not going to table this. So Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Mealy, Mr. Allison.
Yes. Motion passes 6-1. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Item 12, then, would you read that in short form, please?
A resolution authorizing the disposal of 2000 GMC 8500 dump trucks from the City of Williamsport Public Works Department.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion in a second?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Mr. Livermore.
Yeah, so what you have before you tonight is a resolution authorizing disposal of 2000 GMC 8500 dump trucks from the city of the Public Works Department. So there's two trucks. There's number 12, which we have numbers for each of our trucks, 12 and 11. I'll start with 12. 12 has 98,763 miles on it. It's not even passable for Pennsylvania state inspection. Needs new tires, brakes, slack adjusters, air brakes. The cab is rusted out beyond repair. That's that truck. The next one is 107,586 miles on it. The same thing, similar to exist. It can't even get inspected. The box is beyond repair. We'd like to put these on public surplus to auction them off. The money that we do get back from these vehicles will be put back in our liquid fuel account.
Thank you, Mr. Livermore. Was reviewed in finance. I heard it.
It was indeed. And forwarded the full body of council with an exceptionally positive recommendation. Please get rid of those trucks, give the money back to liquid fuels, and then probably we'll spend it later. But it's not really, I think we're expecting to get maybe $1,000 between the two of them, something like that. So.
I hope. Yeah, we're gonna start them at 500 each and see where it goes from there, obviously.
Yeah. That said, the only real item of discussion was that, to the surprise of the finance committee, as it turned out, the membership on the auctioning site where we're selling these is held by RVT. As Mr. Winder pointed out, the city and RVT being the same entity have the same EIN number. It just so happens that RVT got to this site first, I guess, and enrolled it as RVT. We are working on changing that. I was somewhat concerned that RVT was auctioning off City of Williamsport vehicles. Because in general, of course, you want the whole to be the owner of the whatever identity rather than the part. But I guess perhaps it is a little more complex to rectify than just a matter of, going online and plugging in a new name for ourselves. But I would encourage the city to get that taken care of, the administration get that taken care of sooner rather than later, just in the interest of all the confusion we've had between RVT and the city. That particular item should definitely be within ownership of the city, or under the name of the city. And that was the only discussion.
Okay. Mr. Banks.
So as somebody who's been on Auto Trader a lot lately, looking for a truck, was there any discussion? This is actually, I'm being serious. Is there any discussion in finance about actually just putting this up on a non-auction site for a set price? Just because the stock out there even for a farm truck, which is really what you could use this for, there's nothing out there. So.
That we did not.
Yeah.
We should think about that.
Something to consider. Even a blind squirrel.
Mr. Banks, my understanding is because it's city property, it must be sold on an auction.
Norm, can you verify that? Is that,
That's right.
that's correct? Okay. Dave, very good point though. And I appreciate you bringing that up.
Okay, I think we're ready for the vote, please, Mrs. Frank.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Banks. Ms. Mealy.
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Item 13, except for filing. Public Works minutes 10/18/21, Finance minutes 10/18/21, Controllers Report 9/31/21. Is there a motion and a second from council?
So moved. Second.
Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Banks.
Yes.
Ms. Mealy. Mr. Allison.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Announcements, our next council meeting will be next Thursday, December 9th, 2021 at 7 PM right here in Trade and Trains 2. Upcoming meetings, Tuesday, December 7th, 1 PM Finance, 2:30 PM Public Works. Wednesday, December 8th, 11:30 AM Redevelopment Authority, 3:30 PM O&E Pension Board. And that brings us to the end of our agenda. Are there any other comments from council tonight?